Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tank Talk podcast. Yes, it is true. We are the #1 podcast in the entire universe and every multiverse that we know of. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of it. Today, it's a little different. I don't have John. I have Lisa from KGTropicals. Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Glad you're here. You're here because we're going to be talking about a subject that you love. And what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about snails.
We're going to be talking about snails. There's lots of different types of snails. I'm sure you've got your favorites and you'll be able to talk about that today as well. But before we do it, because I actually have never really heard the Lisa story. I've heard the John story. We've all heard the John story a lot of times, but
Right.
I want to hear from you. And I think it would be really interesting as we're talking about snails. Your road, like how did you wind up in the brief version of how did you get into fish keeping and how did that lead to you getting into snails of all things?
Well, that's kind of funny because it's part of John's story. I got into fish keeping because of John. He introduced me to fish. I don't think I ever owned a fish before he did. And he decided when we had been living together for a little bit of time, and he decided he wanted to bring in a 125-gallon aquarium. And I said, okay. In my mind, even though 125 gallons is a lot of water, I wasn't thinking about one jug of a 1 gallon, thing of water 125 times. In my mind, I was thinking of like a 10-gallon tank. That size. And I was like, yeah, that'll be fun. So he brings home this 125-gallon tank. And I'm like, where's that gonna go? What the heck? I wasn't prepared for that. So that's how it started. He brought it in, got it all set up. I think he started off with some arowanas and a few other things like an Oscar. And I think even what do you call it? One of those, we named him Tom. It was a catfish. So anyways, I thought, well, it was kind of ugly in the living room. I really wasn't into it the same way he was the first few months, But then he took me to the fish store. And that's when I got hooked. And I ended up getting a little arowana, and he said no, it wasn't going to go with his arowana, but I got it anyways, bought it with my own money. And we go home, and the arowana did not get along with his arowana, or vice versa. The other arowana was picking on my arowana. So of course it was a Sunday night, of course. So we had to run out to Petco or PetSmart, one of them, and get, I think it was a 55-gallon tank. It was just an emergency setup tank to save this little arowana. And that's how I got into it. That was my very first tank, and I still have that tank and that stand. We still have the 125-gallon that he brought home that I thought was going to be the size of a 10. And it's mine now. It's my Planet tank with angelfish. I keep looking at it, and you can't see it, but it's there. But yeah, that's how I got into fish keeping. And then I started getting into discus, and I loved discus. They were like one of those fish that's probably in some people's mind, the hardest fish to keep. But I started off with that, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought they were beautiful, and I loved them so much. Then I, went up in the fish store. We were breeding African cichlids, and I got into those really hard because I love the Ambuna so much. They're my favorite African cichlid. And yeah, I just started getting into other fish, and I just love fish keeping now. And having a planted aquarium and stuff is something that is so much fun to me, and the snails are a big part of that. So, and you and Joanna are a big part of why I got into snails. So that's because of you guys mainly.
I love it. blame shifting. It's great. Like, hey, this would not have been a problem if it wasn't for you.
Yeah. Oh,
You know,
yeah.
a lot of people, especially for people who just watch this podcast and don't know your full background, at one point, how many tanks did you have up and running? Because before you even opened the store, you were in it up to your eyeballs in fish. You had how many tanks? What were you doing in this garage fish store or garage fish room that you had?
I would say we probably had, oh goodness, 120, 150 African cichlid tanks. Now, they weren't just, there were breeder tanks, and then there were grow out tanks, and then we had like the one tank with I forget what you call them, but we would breed them, and we would strip the eggs and the fry from the mom's mouth, and tumblers. That's what it is. And we would do it that way. And oh my goodness, do we have so many? And that was so much fun. It was probably one of the funnest things I can say. I enjoyed the most with John was creating these little lives and watching them grow. And the first batch that went and somebody bought them, I was like, no, these are my babies. But it got easier. It definitely got easier.
So you think about your background is actually pretty crazy. You've got everything from massive breeding cichlids on a massive scale. I mean, there's not that many people who have had over 100 aquariums, and you're breeding cichlids and doing all that stuff. You open a store, and it was lots and lots and lots of fish. And now here we are, and you guys have plants and all this, the products that you sell on keepfishkeeping.com. And now you've got the snails. You've had those for a long time. So tell me, especially for those people, again, who maybe just overlook the snails, or they're like, I'm really into the fish and all that kind of stuff. But why do you think why would somebody want to add snails to their aquarium?
Well, I think if you have a planet aquarium, in my opinion, I think you should have snails. Now, if you don't have a planet aquarium, I don't think they're as beneficial. But I definitely think if you have a planet aquarium, you should have them. They are so beneficial for many reasons. The circle of life. They produce poop, but why do they produce poop? They're helping to clean up the plant, your dead plants, and help with the detritus and do all that good stuff. So when your snails are in there doing that, well, they got to poop, and that poop helps to fertilize your plants. So I find that they're very beneficial in that way. They're not just algae cleaners. People think, oh, let's throw some snails in there and they'll clean up the algae. But not all snails eat just algae. So.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So the snails, they can be wonderful eating algae. And that's something I think that a lot of people do overlook. Like you said, the fact that they're going to clean up a lot of that detritus, a lot of the food that fish touch after a while. So if you feed a little bit too much food in your aquarium, then it's nice because those snails come through and they'll eat some of that food. Now, most fish aren't going to eat rotten food, and even snails sometimes are like, I'm not eating this because it's completely rotten. But if it's been in the aquarium a little bit longer than the fish might appreciate, the snails are like, yeah, man, I'm good. I'll still eat this stuff.
Right.
So here's the question I get a lot. I would love to hear your opinion on it.
All right.
And it goes something like this. I'm sure you've heard it before. My snails, or people who get snails, they're just poop machines, and so they're not worth it. How would you respond to somebody who says, yeah, I'm not going to bother with snails because all they are is poop machines and they make my tank worse?
Oh, I'd say, well, don't get a placo then, because that's even worse. But I would answer the same way I just did if it was a planet aquarium. If it was planet, well, I would say, hey, they're very beneficial for your tank, and you should, reconsider. They're awesome to have. And if you get the right ones, you can have a lot of fun with them, and you can watch them breed. And, the little baby snails are super duper cute. Now, if you have just a little 10-gallon with your little neon decorations and everything. You don't have any kind of plants in there. Or maybe you do. Maybe you have like an anubias on something and it's not planted, in the substrate. Well, the poop isn't benefiting the anubias. So I could understand if you don't want the poop in the snail. But again, like I said, I would reconsider because they're adorable.
And one of the things I've always tried to explain to people is, unlike fish, where, okay, let's just say you have an African cichlid. Yeah, it eats food and it poops, and then that's what happens. With the snail, the added benefit is, especially from the algae eating perspective, if the snail eats the algae,
Right.
and let's say, I don't know, I'll throw a number out there, 75% of what it consumed actually goes to building the snail's body, right, as food, and then it leaves behind 25% as waste. Really what you did is you exchanged a lot of algae for a little bit of waste. And to me, I don't know about
Right.
you, but I would rather gravel vac a little bit of waste than have to be scraping algae off of the glass and worry
And
about on your
that's true.
decorations and plants, right?
Because I always forget about that. They are looked at as algae cleaners, but they're not all that great at cleaning algae. Not all of them. Some of them are better than others, like your Nerite snails. That if you want somebody or you want a snail that's going to clean algae, then you should get a Nerite snail because those they thrive on algae to live. But if you want, a mystery snail or, rabbit snail or something, these snails need more than just algae to survive. Especially mystery snails, they need a lot more to survive than algae.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Now, in your opinion,
Mhm.
if you had somebody who's new to snails and like, yeah, you know what? Okay, you sold me. I do want to keep snails. What would you say are your top, I don't know, 3 to 5 favorite snails?
Ooh. Okay. I could give you five, but for
Love it. Now, are
different.
you going to go in reverse order? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
let's do it.
definitely. Okay.
Coming up at
So
number 5.
Okay, so number five, I would Japanese trapdoor snails. I would say those. I love those, and I know I'm going to say that about every single one of them. But I like them because they're hardy. They aren't hard to keep. They can tolerate different water conditions. I guess you could say they're tolerable more to certain water conditions. They the temperature they can handle flexibility with the temperature, and that's why I think they're used in ponds outside a lot of time, not just aquariums. It's because they're hardy little snails and they can get to be about 2 inches. They're peaceful, and I love what they look like. They're just adorable. I don't have a picture of them right now, but
We'll
they
make
are.
John throw up a picture when he edits the
Yeah.
video.
And I love how they get that green. Some of them get that like sage green look at the tip of their shell, and it's just so cute. And oh my goodness, when they have babies, they're live babies, and they just appear. They just appear, and you can breed them like crazy. So you get free snails. You don't have the eggs everywhere. That's a good thing. I would say number four. Number four. What would I say number four is? Okay. I'm going to give you two for number four.
Wow,
Okay.
so we're getting a
Can
top 6 then.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
I would say rabbit snails and the new ones that just came out, the blueberry snails.
Okay.
They both do different things, but I think they could both be beneficial, and I just absolutely love them. The rabbit snails, they will stir up the substrate and cause aeration in your substrate to, it's just a very beneficial snail. And then I would say the blueberry snail. Now, the cool thing about them is that they like to eat malm and biofilm, and to me they're almost like a shrimp snail, the way they like to eat the biofilm. At first I didn't understand that they're not the same as other snails, and can't just throw in some Cats Aquatics for them. They're not going to eat it. They like the biofilm. They like the mom. They like it to be more natural. And I like those kind of aquariums, like dark water type stuff. So yeah, those are going to be my number 4.
Now, before we get to the top 3, I have a story for you about these, and maybe you can help me, because the blueberry snails, I got a bunch. So I imported a bunch of blueberry snails. I think it was right around 300.
Oh, wow.
I know. Well, yeah. Oh, wow. Except the vast majority showed up deceased. So I think I threw, I split them up into a couple 10-gallon aquariums, and I probably only actually wound up with maybe 10 or 15 that actually lived. The rest of them, you know how it is too. You guys know, especially when you get snails and you chuck them in a tank, well, they're all just kind of curled up and they're like, yeah, we're afraid. And it takes them a while to come out of their shells and swim around. Right. So I'm waiting, and a day or two later, I'm like, okay, a lot of these other ones, they must be dead, because only the ones that attach to the glass and kind of crawled around, I figured were alive. Now, when it comes to, have you bred these snails at all or seen any babies? Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. So I'll tell you a story about them while we're still on that, number 4. My blueberry snails, they come in as wild caught. They're not, they're wild caught when they come to you. So I set my tanks up for them when I brought them in. I only got 50 at first, I didn't do 300. That's scary. So I brought them in, I put them on a 10-gallon, but the 10-gallon I had set up prior to them getting there with a lot of catappa leaves and the Fritz Nature box, because they like the bark, and they love mom, and they like to have plants in there. So I set it up for it to be more kind of like a dark water scape, I guess you could say. And they did great. They really did. They did wonderful. I had probably about 30 or 40 babies. They ended up breeding, and this is over time, not at one time, because I didn't sell them right away. I wanted to see if I could take care of them first, and how, what I needed to do with them to keep them alive. And I just kept hearing, things about them, and I was like, I'm going to make this work. So I did, and they did wonderful. I sold quite a few of them, and then something really bad happened in my snail room. When it got cold, my bottom tanks, they weren't heating correctly, I guess you could say, because the floor in the snail room wasn't insulated. So my bottom tanks got really cold, and all my babies died. All my blueberry babies died, and I was like, oh. But yeah, they really like to have it be more like nature.
Yeah. So what's interesting about those particular, and I'm just learning about them, because I'd never even heard of them before, and I saw them on a list. I'm like, oh, these are cool. You do a little bit of research. Oh, they give birth to live babies. Like you mentioned the Japanese. There's a trapdoor snail that does that as well.
And the rabbit snails do too. That's what I like about them.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, these sound really interesting. I'll bring them in. I'll breed them. So here's another crazy thing. I bring in another bunch of fish, and I had to use one of those 10 gallons as a quarantine tank. I brought in something like 50 red tail penguin tetras, which are kind of rare, pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And they're small. At least when I brought them in, they were very small, maybe 3/4 of an inch. Well, I lose them. So some fish, they do not acclimate well. And you're going to be selling, you just lose all the fish you bring in. No, normally 99.9% of the time, the stuff I bring in does just fine. But these are just 2 stories where I was like, this is not so good. So these fish, they don't make it. You want to know the crazy thing? They were in that same tank with those blueberry snails. I never found a body. So as they died, those blueberry snails ate the fish were not big, but they ate them all as they died.
That's interesting.
I never pulled a single dead fish out of that aquarium, and gone, all of them. It was so crazy.
So that's a really interesting thing to know. So feed them dead fish. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily a great idea, because
No, I'm just kidding. I've
got all these fish that have all these diseases. I'm going to put them in the blueberries.
Yeah.
But,
well, it makes you understand though that, all right, these are new to the hobby, but they don't just eat mom and detritus and plant matter. They eat protein. They eat things that die in nature. So
Yep.
that's a really interesting thing to know. I really like that. I like
Yeah.
that I learned something.
Yeah, well, it's what's messed up is when you've got a quarantine tank, like I'm sure you guys do at times. If I bring in a bunch of fish, especially when they're smaller and there might be 150, 200 in a tank, and I've got snails, whether they're trumpet snails, pest snails, whatever,
Right.
and something dies, I very rarely ever find the body. So if I think I have 200 fish in there, I have to recount the fish to make sure I've actually got close to 200, because if something
Right.
dies in there, it's not like I'm pulling little babies out, dead fish. They just get eaten by whatever's in there, the scavengers. So,
Right. And it's not that the snails are killing them, they're
oh,
just cleaning up.
yep, exactly. They're doing their job. All right. So
Right.
we talked about the three of the
Oh, yeah.
5, 4 tied for 4, but we got a top 3 we have to deal with here,
Oh, okay.
right? Because we haven't finished your thought. So coming in at number 3.
Ram's horn snails. And it's your fault. It's Joanna's fault. It's y'all's fault. When
What did we do to you?
when John and I came over to your house back 2021, when we were up there for the Aquashella. Gosh, I'm getting them all mixed up now. We came over and I was just so like in awe over the tanks that had all those ram's horn snails all over the substrate. And I'm like, wow, those are so cute. I love these ram's horn snails. They're absolutely adorable. I had never had a ram's horn snail before, ever. So after that, I go home and a friend of mine, he said he had some ram's horn snails. And I was like, oh, would you mind sending me a couple of those? So he sent me about 10 through the mail. Okay. In a yellow vanilla envelope, padded, cushion, with the bubble wrap inside of it. Sent it through the mail that away. Ram's horn snails. And I'd say a few survived, and I stuck them in my King George beta tank. And they started reproducing. And then some of them got ate because George liked to eat them, like suck out the inside and eat them. They were a snack to him. But after he passed away, those snails were able to reproduce and not be killed and tortured. And then they just kept reproducing and reproducing. And I was like, this is heaven. I've got exactly what Joanna has now. I love it. And then they just kept on reproducing. And then I had them in all these tanks. And I told John one day, I said, you know what? I think we should sell these. I think people will buy them. We should sell them. And he's like, I don't know. It took him like a year. Yeah, I mean, we were still selling betas at that point. So it took about a year to convince him to sell ram's horn snails. And all of them are mine that I've bred, obviously. But yeah, it's your fault.
Well, it's good to hear. Yeah, the ram's horns. You know what's so funny about this story is at that time you came here, yeah, there was a ton of ram's horn snails in our tanks, not because we necessarily were trying to breed them. It's just that's what happens. You put them in the tank, they get some extra food.
Right.
Now, when I look around the fish room, because I got a big shipment of pea puffers. I think I had a couple hundred pea puffers. I'm like, oh man, what are we gonna do? So I brought in some clams on a half shell, and they would eat that, but I didn't really have any snails. They're all gone. So all the quarantine tanks that I've got, sometimes cichlids wind up in the tanks and roaches or something, and it wiped out pretty much all of my ram's horn, my pond snails. I have a couple tanks with Malaysian trumpet snails, but that's it. So now you're the one with all the ram's horn snails. We've got next to none. But I don't think people realize, they think of the ram's horn snail as kind of like almost like a pest snail.
Oh, yeah, they do.
But how pretty they really are when they're full size. They are so cool. And if you like those, oh my gosh. I don't know if you saw Joanna's video a couple weeks ago. I got 2. They look just like ram's horn snails. In fact, I think their common name is giant ram's horn snails. they get very big, like big.
I
And they have
have
that,
some that size.
yeah, so they have the same pattern, but there are different species. Now, the only downside to these particular types of snails, they eat plants. And I mean, they just devoured all her anubias that were in that tank, the val. They're even eating hornwort. Like her tank is going to be a plant desert here pretty soon.
Oh
They're a
no.
very different species than the ram's horn snails that you have, that we had. So if you've got a non-planted tank, they're fine. But if you do have a planted tank, those would be horrible to
I,
have. They
I
look,
have to check that out.
yeah. Ask Joanna about it. They're big. I
Yeah.
mean, and they get really large. So yeah, the ram's horn, great snail, cool color, right? And they've got that. The reason why we call them ram's horn snails, they have like a ram's horn
Right.
sort of pattern to them. They're really awesome. And you're right, they should sell like crazy because believe it or not, that's what a lot of people use to feed things like pea puffers or some of their cichlids. I used to take them out by the handful and give them to my silver dollars, my ballast sharks, my tinfoil barbs,
Wow.
all my African cichlids. Love those things.
I tried to feed them to John's Oscar. They don't like them, and now he has about 500,000 in there because nobody eats them in there. I put a few in there that were just undesirable, and I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
won't be able to sell them. It was his idea. He said, just stick them in there. I said,
Yeah.
okay, I'll do it. I just won't watch. And well, yeah, that's what happened. They Sorry, I had a call. Potential spam.
Uh,
uh, but but yeah, the Oscars wouldn't eat them, but the pea puffers will.
oh yeah. I'm surprised the Oscars, because I used to do that in my Oscar 125 with all the other cichlids. I just chuck them in there and they go after them right away. You know why? You can tell John he's probably really spoiling those fish and they're not hungry enough to be like, I'm going to take 2 seconds to eat this little special morsel here, but they don't want to
Right.
work for the food. So it's his fault, actually. It's not their
That's
fault. It's not
I
yours. It's his
feed
fault.
I feed his fish, so it's my fault.
No, no,
I'll,
it's still his fault.
oh, okay. So I'll starve them for a couple of days, and then they'll eat
And
them.
then watch. They're like, oh, wow, the snails are
Ooh,
gone. How about
that's
that?
true. I didn't think about that.
Hmm.
Very good point. Very good point.
So we're now last two, or your top two. So you surprised me. I'm not going to lie. You surprised me with number three with the ram's horn. So
Yeah.
now we're down to our top two all time Lisa snails. Coming in at number two. What do we got?
The mystery snail.
Okay.
I love the mystery snail. I think they are so, to me, they're like the puppy dog of snails. You know how like the Oscar is the puppy dog of fish. So I think that of the mystery snails. I think they're so much fun to watch. They have such a personality, and you can get so many different colors. There's like seven or eight. The the blue ones, the ivory, the gold, the jade, the chestnut, the purple, the magenta, and I know I'm missing one. I think
Well,
I'm,
you already named way more than I could possibly name.
but my
Is there a green?
favorite
Is Jade the green one?
jade. Jade is the green
Okay.
one, yeah. And I think the purple and the magenta, those two are my favorite. And I I breed them myself, and they're I don't get as many. So sometimes the magenta will come out ivory
Oh, wow.
instead of or is that the purple? No, it's the magenta. The
Okay.
magenta will come out ivory sometimes instead of magenta,
Huh.
or they might come out the chestnut instead of you know that. Oh, I know what it is. It's the albino.
There you go. Yeah.
Albino, but the albino looks very similar to the chestnut.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah, I had
but
the
yeah.
magentas for a while, and I don't. Same thing. The magentas for me, I every once in a while I get an egg clutch from them, but for me the golds bred a lot, and then I can't remember what was in number two. Probably just the blueberry ones. Not blueberry, but the blue.
Oh, the blue
Yeah,
mystery
those.
snails.
Yeah,
Hmm.
those would breed a decent amount, but yeah, the
Oh
magentas were
yeah.
tough for me.
Yeah, I think they're beautiful though, and like the magentas are the ones with the white feet. I call
Yeah.
them feet, white feet, and then the purples are the dark feet, and they're a little bit darker purple too, and the magenta are more of a lighter shade of a purple magenta, but they're both so beautiful. They're my favorite. And you're right, the blue mystery snails, oh my goodness, I've like thousands and thousands of babies of those right now because I've just got so many mystery snails.
That's a good thing.
And whenever, I have some mystery snails that I know I can't sell because maybe their shell isn't developed the right way or it's flawed a little bit, I stick it in my 125. I have a 125 kind of like a tank where I just let them live the rest of their life. And there's quite a few in there, but, or if they get too big, I can't sell them when they're too big. So they go in there too. So it's hilarious. If you lift up the lid, there's clutches all the way around, like hundreds of clutches going all the way around the 125 or up on the lid, because I do keep the water down a little bit in case they want to go up there and do that. So, but yeah, they're fun. I love them.
That's awesome. Number one.
The Nerite snails.
Okay.
There's so many Nerite snails that you can get. There's just, so many varieties. You have the horned ones, you have the red racers, you have the tigers and the zebras, you have the little pumpkin ones. And I'm so interested in learning everything about these little snails too. I bought a book off Amazon, but it's okay because it's a book and it is this thick. And I forget who the author is. Oh my goodness. But this book has so much information in it, and I am so excited to learn all about every single one of these little snails and what you need to do to raise them in your aquarium the right way so that they're happy, because they can be really hard to keep. If you don't have the proper setup, they can just die. It's so easy to kill a Nerite snail because of the fact that if you're not giving it what it needs, like you're not giving it algae for it to survive off of, it's not going to just eat, like I said, it's not going to eat a cat's aquatics
calcium thing.
Yeah, it's not that they're not going to eat that. Whenever I send snails out, I always send out a sample of cat's aquatics because that's what I feed my mystery snails and my ram's horn snails and a few of the others that I do keep too. But never ever do I send a sample out with one of the Nerite snails because they're not going to eat it, and I don't want people to put it in there and it doesn't get ate and they're like, oh, my snails don't like that food. Well, it's because they don't eat it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely love them, and I'm excited to learn more about them because there's a lot of them out there.
There are a lot of different patterns, different colors. Now, you haven't tried to breed the Nerites, right? Not yet?
No, I want to learn more about how to keep them alive first, like.
Yeah.
And if they're, like I said, if they're in the right environment, they will live for 2 years. They're really awesome little snails. But if you're just sticking them in, an aquarium and not giving them what they need, they're not going to live.
Yep. And the interesting thing about the Nerite snails, for those who don't know, if they ever try to breed them, they don't breed like other snails do. They need brackish water. So you can't breed them in a freshwater aquarium, which is good for those of you who don't want to be overrun with snails. But at the same time, if you do want to breed them, you're going to have to really, really try, set up a separate tank, throw them in brackish water. And then eventually when those babies hatch, you move them to freshwater because they live out their adult lives in freshwater for the most part. But you're absolutely right. They're gorgeous snails. Now they do one thing, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's one annoying thing about Nerite snails. Now, have you found anything to be annoying about them?
Yeah, they escape. You have to keep lids on your tanks. I had one called Go. I named him Go because every day I'd come in, not every day, but a couple times a week, I'd come in and I'd find Go on the floor. I'd put something, I had one of those Aquatop nano tanks, like Joanna has one. And that little part where you put the food in,
Hmm.
that's where he would come out. So I had to start like putting something over top of it so he couldn't come out. And whenever we would go somewhere to like Aquashella or something, I would put a note on there for my pet sitter, my fish sitter, you know, keep this covered, you know, because Go would get out. And that snail got out about 15 times, maybe more. And I would think he was dead. At first, I thought he was dead, but I chuck him right back in there and there he goes again.
Yeah.
And it was just the craziest thing. Is that what you were saying? Is
That's
that
one
what
of the things.
one
There's
of the
another thing that with the Nerites that, it's the one thing I don't, they're the, I think the most interesting in terms of their patterns and colors,
hmm
it's the eggs. So the females,
Oh,
I don't know if you've, all those little white spots
yeah,
all over like the
right.
driftwood and stuff. Now I have not, I don't know if you have, but I haven't found anything that eats those little hard white eggs. Have you found anything?
No, you just have to scrape them off.
You just scrape them off. Yeah. So that's the,
Yeah.
for those of you who, you keep Nerite snails and then maybe, because I'll hear this question all the time, did my Nerite snails have babies? Because I have all these little white dots everywhere. What are these little white? I'm like, no, those are the eggs. They are not going to hatch because you don't have
Mhm.
brackish water. So in some ways it's fine because you're not going to be overrun. But in other ways, it's like if you did have a brackish water setup, those things would absolutely breed like crazy, which is,
Can you
I still want to do
imagine?
that. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah, I am trying to set up a natural environment for them to where they're able to, you know, I watch videos and I just think it's so cool how they're collected in nature
Mhm.
and they, it's like they love to come up out of the water and live in little crevice things, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to like replicate that, I guess. And I don't know if I can do that and I can do it the right way and then I can breed them, I'll be so excited. So it's one
Yeah.
of my
That's cool.
future projects.
Can you talk a little bit about, because I think it's interesting, you mentioned that you have all these clutches for mystery snails. How is it, how do you maximize or how do you, if one were interested in breeding mystery snails, generally speaking, what's the best way to go about it?
Just add water. I'm just kidding. um, for me, it's just been keeping the water down from the top. Keep it down a good inch, at least an inch, but 2 inches is ideal. And then make sure your lids, you know, make sure you have lids, have it covered. The humidity is good, the heat, you know, the right temperature, like I'd say 77, 78, you know, is good. And just if as long as you have them in a tank where fish aren't trying to get to the snail and stress them out and they have a proper diet and they're, you know, healthy, they're going to go up there, they're going to do their thing. And of course having more than one is good because, you know, they got to they need to have the male and the female for the mystery snail. Once you get them to actually go up there and have a clutch, leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Wait a few weeks. Let the eggs, you know, do their thing. Let the snails grow in there and become little baby snails, and they'll come out. I had someone reach out to me one day, and they were like, they've been up there for a long time and they haven't hatched. What do I do? And I'm like, oh, you know, just splash some water up on them. Splash a little water up there and do that maybe once a day, not right away, you know, but closer to the end after a few weeks. And sure enough, he said it worked. And another thing that I have found that works if they haven't hatched right away and I'm splashing, if you look on the opposite side of the aquarium and you look like where you would see them flat, not the bubbly part, but you know, the flat part. And if they're like, if it's black in there or a darker color, they're ready to come out. They just might be stuck in there, you know, because there's not enough moisture for them to be able to break through and get out. So if you just kind of gently push on it, it opens up. It just, let it flake off a little bit and break off. Just be gentle, and you'll see they'll be in there, and it's just like, oh, they just needed help coming out. And you splash a little water up there, and they come out, and then they just snail around and become little snails.
And then they snail around. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. So that's interesting. So you're more hands off, which is kind of cool. That's how I bred them too. Back when I had them, I had a couple 20-gallon longs with some gold mystery snails. I think I had blues in the other one, and
Mhm.
they would just, and I didn't. I didn't really try to maximize the breeding, so I didn't lower the water level. So they were actually laying the egg clutches on the underside of the glass lids,
Yeah, I
and
have
that
that
was
too.
keeping them moist enough where, and that's the key, like you said, is if those egg clutches get completely dry, they're going to die. They're not going to
Mhm.
hatch. So it was keeping them moist enough where they would eventually just hatch and fall back into the aquarium. Then you wind up with a whole
Right.
mess load of them. Baby mystery snails are incredibly cute because they
They
look
are
like
so
miniature
cute.
versions of the larger ones.
They are so adorable. And oh my goodness, if you want to see something super cute, peel off, or not peel, but cut a sweet potato. And
Mm.
I actually take and I'll cook the sweet potato for about 3 minutes. And that way it's a little bit soft. And then I slice it like a potato chip, and I'll put the sweet potato in each tank, and you won't even see that slice of sweet potato. It'll just be 100% covered with snails, and if you have babies, it's just the cutest thing ever. So
That is
yeah, they're
so
awesome.
cool. So the egg clutches for the mystery snails, just try to keep them moist, splash some water up there. Do you know? Because I never really actually, I don't think in my brain I ever timed it. From the time you see the clutch to the time they hatch, do you have an approximate time how long that takes?
I have never like I've never like document it, if it's what I'm trying to say here. I've never documented like from the first time I saw one particular clutch to when the snails started coming out. I've never done it because I've got so many. I've got
That's the same thing with
hundreds and
me.
hundreds. Yeah, it's just I watch after a while you just know what to look for.
Right.
And in like my snail room, I don't have, well, a couple lids. I have a couple lids on certain tanks, like my Nerite snails, and just a few different ones that want to escape. But as far as my mystery snails go, they don't have any lids. It's just what it is. I keep the water down, and I do go in there and I'll splash water on once a day. That's it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, then hey, there's extra calcium for the other ones to have later on when I crush it up in there for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, that's a good point too, because the other side of that is if the egg clutch falls in the water, those are done. They don't have enough the babies won't have enough
Yeah.
oxygen. Not enough oxygen gets through that snail's the shell for the egg to get to the baby. So if it gets completely submerged, that unless you pull that out of the water right away, I've never had success hatching them at that point. They usually all just die,
Yeah.
and you just,
Yeah.
like you said, it dissolves and you've got calcium for the rest
You've
of them.
got calcium.
Speaking of which, you have mentioned a couple times the Cats Aquatics thing.
Right.
With the exception of the Nerite snails, how are you feeding all of these snails, whether it's mystery snails, rams, or are there different mechanisms for feeding the mystery snails, ram's horn, the trapdoor snails, that kind of thing?
Well, I kind of have a routine because I believe in a varied diet, not only for fish, but also for snails. So, mystery snails, I'm going to go with them first just because, you know, one of my favorite. So, with the mystery snails, I like to give them fresh vegetables. I think it's very important for them to have fresh vegetables, not just something that is in a can. I think that they need to have. I like to feed mine sweet potatoes. I like to feed mine kale. I like to feed mine cucumbers. I have fed celery, even though it doesn't have much nutritional value to it for them. They still like it as like a snack. And then also carrots, but I definitely blanch that first and then broccoli, cucumber, or not cucumbers, broccoli, cauliflower. These are all really good types of fresh vegetables for them to get some calcium from. So I make sure I kind of do a rotation of that, cats aquatics, and also they need to get some protein because the protein benefits their shell as well, not just calcium. So for protein, I give them carnivore from Northfin. I also do give them kelp wafers from Northfin. That'll be in my rotation too. So, and if I have expired food, like I've had some krill pellets, I'm like, oh, gonna use that. That's more protein, and so I use that, and they do very well with that. But and that's with the mystery snails. But like the ram's horn snails, shoot. I have to go. I tell John every Sunday and Monday. I sell a lot of mystery snails on our website, so I love getting the ones out of my 75-gallon tank and my 125 because they're just, I feel like their shells look better for some reason. I don't know, but I just like to get them. And so what I do is I'll stick a slice of cucumber, like if you shave a cucumber slice,
Yep.
I put that in there, and that's how I catch them. They'll just all get on there, and I'll have like hundreds of ram's horns on these cucumbers, and I have them. I'm ready to pack my ram's horns for the day, but I joke around with John. I'm like, I just went snailing. Instead of fishing, I go snailing. But yeah, ram's horn snails will basically eat anything. So throw in your expired food, do whatever you got, feed them whatever you got, and they're pretty easy. Trapdoor snails, same way. I found with the rabbit snails, they like, they like stuff more like your mom, your algae. They're not, sometimes they'll eat cats aquatics, but it's not something that I generally give them a lot.
And that cats aquatics food, what would be the advantage to feeding that as opposed to some of the other stuff that you feed?
I think it's important for them to get calcium from somewhere. I don't think it's a staple food. I think it's a good added food. I think that if you're feeding your snails fresh vegetables and cats aquatics, they're going to get their calcium. They're going to get what they need. But I would definitely feed cats aquatics. 3 times a week. That's what I do. I go through a lot of it, and
Yeah.
it helps. It's very helpful for their shell and their growth, and they breed.
And I love that you're doing that. I love that you feed that very diet because it is when I have people come to me and say, oh, my snails, their shells are thin or they're just not healthy. They're not reproducing. You brought up something that's so important. It's not just, oh, let's throw them in a tank. They eat algae. And like you said at the beginning, yes, they will eat some of the detritus depending on the snail type. However, they do need, it's nice for them to have a protein source. And I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people overlook that. And I did the same thing when I had my snail breeding tanks. They would get a mix of whatever, Bug Pro or sinking cichlid pellets. The other thing that they really loved, I don't know if you've ever tried it, but like the Rapashi gel foods.
I've never tried that.
Oh my gosh. So Rapashi it's a powder, and basically you just take this stuff, you mix it in water, you throw it in the microwave, stir it up, it solidifies, and then you can cut it in these big long strips. I would never do this in a tank with gravel. Don't ever do it. It will create all kinds of mess. But with either bare bottom or a tank with sand, you can put these chunks in, and it's nice because it does have a mix of protein and all the vegetable matter that they need and all the nutrients. So it's a nice addition, but the cats aquatic stuff is great, like you said, because they're actually ingesting the calcium. A lot of people think, hey, if it's just in the water, it'll be fine. If I have hard water, it'll be fine. And that's partially true. But like you said, when you're feeding that very diet, you're going to get the healthiest possible snails.
And it's like Snello. The Rapashi sounds like Snello
because exactly what it is.
You can make your own snail food with the gelatin and, oh my gosh, the eggs that John eats a lot of eggs.
I do too.
So I make him save all the eggshells, and I'll take those and I'll rinse them off, but then I stick them on a sheet, a cookie sheet, and then I stick them in the oven for about 30 minutes on about 320, maybe, or no, maybe it's like 250, something like that, not really high. Um, and then I crush them, and I use the shells to go, I mix them with my aragonite for substrate so that the snails have some of that, extra calcium in the water column. And
That is really cool. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, it's okay. They graze on it too, and so I just feel like it's been very helpful. I have a lot of eggshells. I have lots of eggshells, just like crushed, and I throw it in everything. Like I said, I use it as a substrate with aragonite for them to just do their thing in. So, and
Now,
another. Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead. No, go.
I was going to say another beneficial thing for mystery snails, as far as keeping their shells healthy, is to not have your temperature up really high, because the higher your temperature is, the they're they're going to end up aging quicker, and their shells could eventually erode and deteriorate once, the temperature's too high. So if you keep your temperature a little bit lower, like maybe around 73, 74, if that works for your fish too, it's gonna slow their growth rate, sort of, and keep their shell healthier, and they should live a little bit longer because they don't have a very long lifespan anyways. So I just want to make sure.
Oh, that's awesome. So, yeah, the temperatures low 70s is all, and they can go into, I mean, most of them, all of them go into the 60s, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They
So,
like 68, 69, 70.
yeah,
They can live in that with guppies.
yeah, absolutely. We're gonna have to get in there. Remind me, we got to talk about the tank mates in a second.
Oh,
Other water, do you know your water parameters there? Like, what are you typically in terms of pH, water
um,
hardness information? What are you doing with them to
uh,
keep them like healthy?
I would say my pH is typically around 8.
Okay.
Um, it's maybe slightly lower. I measure this stuff, believe it or not. I just can't always remember the numbers. I have recently, in the past couple years, started learning more about the GH and the KH and all that kind of stuff too. Um, and I found that we have really good water and pH for snails, and I think that's why I'm able to keep them so well, among a few other things. But like the GH and the KH is important to have it up like 8. Um, One of them, I can't remember. I think the GH,
Mhm.
it should be like 8 to 18 or something. And um, so, yeah, it's very important to, have that, all of that work together. And there are things that you can do to buffer it so it's, better for the snails. I don't really like to do that, though. I don't like to add a chemical type stuff like equilibrium and all that, even though it's safe to do, but I'd rather just it be more of a natural thing, like the substrate. I don't mind doing it with the substrate by doing the aragonite and the
Mhm.
eggshells and stuff. But if
Yeah.
I have to start adding, all that other stuff, I just feel like it's just a lot of work for all the tanks I have.
Yeah. Well, and it's unnecessary because I do, listening to the way that you keep these snails, I think you've got it nailed. I mean, you've got the temperatures at the right, at the optimum temperature. The fact that you're adding in the aragonite and the eggshells to your substrate means now you've got highly buffered water where you can keep it at a pH of 8. And for us, our GH and KH were right around 10 degrees, and they were loving that.
Oh, that's
And I'll bet you if you're using aragonite, eggshells, I'm sure you're probably right around 8 to 12 somewhere for your GH and
oh,
KH, which is perfect. I mean, so the point is when you're breeding these snails, they're from the beginning, they're getting really, really, really nice shells. And so that when
That's
you're sending
important.
them out, people don't have to worry, okay, am I going to get these snails that are weak and then I get them in my water and they've been stressed out and then my temperatures are a little bit higher, what's going to happen? It sounds like you guys really have this nailed down. So that's really cool.
I will say that the Malawi Victoria buffer I heard is really good. I've never personally used it, but I heard that really does help if you need to use a buffer. And
Yeah.
I think that's a Seachem product.
I used the Fritz, it was the Riff, I think it was the Riff Lake
Oh,
cichlid buffer. And that stuff, I just wanted to see what it would do. And I already had, my water's already hard with a higher pH, and it boosted it up a little bit. And it was like the directions were the easiest thing in the world. It's like, add this much per 10 gallons if you want this much of an increase in your GH. I'm like, wow, you can't make it a whole lot more simple than that. So,
yeah, that's a good point. I forgot we even sell that.
yeah.
Oops.
Use the Fritz Rift Lake
Oh yeah.
cichlid buffer. It's great. And it's a powder. And like I said, it's so easy to use, which is nice.
Just not the salt.
Not the salt.
Not
Yeah,
the
right.
salt.
Do not use sodium chloride. Snails typically are like not a big fan of that. All right. So here's
Right.
a question that
Okay.
everybody's going to want to know.
Mhm.
Well, two questions. Question number one is, what would you say for Nerite mystery snails, especially minimum tank size?
Ooh. I think that's going to depend on how much work you want to put into it. Because they do poop. They poop a lot. So if you're not somebody who is going to take care of your aquarium and clean it a lot, then I would say one one Nerite or one mystery snail per 5 or 10 gallons. It, like I said, it just depends on how much work you're going to put into it. It's just like if you have breeder tanks, you're going to end up water changing a lot more often because you've got a lot of or fry grow out tanks because you want them to grow. So you're going to end up doing more water changes. So I would say just make sure you're doing the right thing. You can have more. You can have 4 or 5 of them, it's fine. Just make sure they're getting the food. They're not fighting with other fish to get food, and competing, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I would say if you only have a 10-gallon tank, just have fun. If you have like a 20 or 30-gallon or bigger, have a, I don't want to say as many as you want because I could get in trouble
Almost.
saying that. But you know, you're
Within
probably gonna,
reason.
yeah, exactly. Have, I don't know, my 75-gallon guppy tank. It has probably 10 Nerite snails and 385 ram's horn snails.
You counted them, huh? Not 386, not
No,
384,
it could be more.
385.
It could be more.
Yeah.
And I have them in there with a mono shrimp. And you know what? But it's a heavily planted tank.
Yeah.
So it's benefiting from all that snail waste.
I had a 20 long that when I was breeding the gold mystery snails, and in one of the fish room tours I showed it and people freaked out. They're like, how many mystery snails do you have? And I'm like, I don't know, probably 200-300. And they
Oh,
weren't
that's funny.
small, but they were going crazy. They were breeding there. And here's the thing. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. People ask all the time, how do I get rid of blackbeard algae? Barely anything eats it. I used to take Anubias that were covered in blackbeard algae and put it in that mystery snail 20-gallon. Because there was so much food competition, they would clean off that Anubias beautifully within like 24 hours. It looked amazing. And that's
Nice.
blackbeard algae. So not
Yeah,
saying
it's
that they
some
all
tough
do that,
stuff.
but it was pretty cool. So
Oh, yeah.
if you were to pick your top favorite tank mates with your snails, mystery snails, Nerite snails, whatever, what would they be? What do you think are the safe choices for people who want to have mystery snails and put them in a tank with fish?
I would go with guppies. I have had a lot of success with guppies and mystery snails, all the snails. They are so peaceful. But I think if people know me, they know I'm gonna say guppies anyways. uh, Fish that aren't fin nippers, that I say that because if you have mystery snails, you know that their antennas, um, they're like bait for some fish, and they, especially like a beta, oh my gosh, they want to attack it, and after a while that stresses, the snail out, and it can kill them. So I would stick with fish that aren't gonna do that, and that's a little tough because it just depends. Some betas are nice betas, and some betas are very nice. So it's just gonna kind of depend. I would go with peaceful community fish. Yeah. Stay away from, like, obviously you don't want pea puffers, and I would even stay away from cory cats, and not because they're not peaceful, but they're going to compete for food.
Good, yeah.
So I have found that that's a problem sometimes, because I have cory cats in one of my tanks, and the snails, I'll see shells, and it's like, I know why. It's because they're competing for food.
Yeah.
And that can be a problem. But as far as, wow, let's see, other things, I would definitely say shrimp. I know that's not a fish, but shrimp do really good with snails. They're a good combination. And I would say like your chili rasboras, your cute little nano fish do good with snails.
Yeah, those are all great. That's pretty much the list I would have given too. Yeah. Anything that's community, that's not going to be fin nipping. The one thing I always tell people, because they always ask, can I keep snails or shrimp with cichlids? And I always tell them across the board, for me, the answer is no. I do not trust a single cichlid around any type of invertebrate ever, because that's just what they do, man. They hunt stuff. I don't know if you had a different experience, if there's any cichlids you trust around snails. I haven't found one.
I have I'm having a brain toot, but I have the little ones.
Are they shell dwellers?
No, the
Apistos?
No. They're
Cribs? Rams?
oh goodness, I have them, and I can't. Rams, no, rams.
Yeah, like German blues or Bolivians or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say ram's horn, but yeah, I have the little. I have the black ones. The black.
Okay,
rams,
yeah, the
not,
black. Yeah, the black rams. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're so cute. They have attitude, but they kind of attitude towards each other. But I have.
So far, so good.
Yeah, I have rabbit snails in there with them. I have ram's horn snails in there with them, and blueberry snails, and they don't bother them.
Nice. All right. So that's one I'll have to
So
keep in mind. Maybe the Rams will leave them alone. I always tell people, at least in our fish room, I don't make an effort to remove even like the pest snails from any tank. So if they're not in an aquarium, it's kind of like duckweed. If it's not there, it's because something in the tank is eating them.
yeah,
And I just
right.
always wind up within the quarantine tanks, because they rotate. I wind up with cichlids. And maybe it's because I have such a large number of fish in a quarantine tank at a single time. There's so much food competition. The ones that aren't getting enough sinking pellets are like, well, whatever, I'm going to go eat that thing over there. And that winds up happening. In your tanks, you've got a lot more plants, and it's set up with your aquascape so that you're not going to have hunting issues.
Yeah, they find their places to hide so they don't get ate, and I think after a while they don't even care that they're there.
Yeah. Are there any challenges, any warnings you would tell people, hey, if you want to keep snails, just keep this in mind, like last bits of advice for people?
I would say just be prepared with how to take care of them. Know your water. Definitely know your water, and know your pH and GH and KH. Also, I would say be prepared with knowing what to feed them so that you don't have them, especially like a mystery snail. If you start to see their nail their shells deteriorate, or just start looking unhealthy, then it's kind of too late. So be prepared as far as how to take care of them before you get them, because you can't repair a mystery snail shell. Once it starts, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
So know where you're getting them, and know what to feed them. Use Cuddle Bone. I have that on hand. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's an extra thing I just remembered that I use is Cuddle Bone in my mystery snail tanks. But you know which snail you're getting and what they like, because they're not all the same. They require different things. Some require the water being a little warmer. Some require the water, or I don't mean require, I should say do okay or do good in a variety of water temperatures. And before you put them in a tank with fish, make sure they're gonna be okay with those fish. If you have assassin snails in your tank already, well, don't get ram's horns in there with them. Or if you have mystery snails in there, just know that those babies are going to get ate by those ram's horn snails. So I would say do your research and just know the foods to feed them. All the foods I listed today, those are really good choices for like your mystery snails. And a lot of your other snails too. Just try it. If they don't eat it, well, okay. They don't like that. Don't give it to them next time. But take it out of your water. Take it out of the aquarium so it doesn't cause a problem in your water. Make sure that you have calcium for them in the water. Make sure you're using the right substrate and you're giving them, again, the right food. So
that's awesome advice. Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you for hanging out the last hour or so. You got to be on the Tank Talk podcast, which again, everybody, we all know it's the #1 podcast on the face of this earth. We're going to have you back for a part 2 at some point and talk about something else, because that was a wealth of knowledge and we really appreciate it. So
thank you.
Thanks for being here.
I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun today. I do want to make sure everyone knows I am not an expert or a specialist in snails. I just share my knowledge with what I've learned. And I hope it helps others to take care of their snails.
I think you are a legit snailologist. So that is you. Lisa, you're going to have a badge. Your next live stream on Thursday, Lisa, snailologist. That's your new title.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a whole lot of fun.
Thank you. All right, everybody. So thanks so much again for being here. And we are going to be back same time, same place next week. Hope to see you there. Have a great week, everyone.